Okay, so in our today's session, we'll talk about jQuery. So we have seen our core web technologies, which is our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Your JavaScript basically have various libraries and frameworks. Okay, we have various libraries and frameworks. And one of the library that we'll be talking about today is jQuery. Okay, jQuery basically people refer to as JavaScript query language, or we can also some people say it as a DOM manipulation library as well. Okay, it's a JavaScript DOM manipulation library. Okay, so the things that we can do with jQuery, we can also do it with JavaScript because your jQuery is based upon JavaScript. So it basically provides you a wrapper which basically reduces the amount of the code that you have to write. Okay, so if you basically achieve or address a problem in 4 different steps in JavaScript, you can do the same thing with one step in jQuery. Okay, your jQuery is an open source library, it's free, so anybody can use it. So the way you include your jQuery in your application, you just go to code.jquery.com and then you download the latest jQuery that's there in that website. So there are a couple of different ways to include jQuery in your application. One is you basically go to include the CDN itself, jQuery CDN, and or you can basically download it and then you can include the libraries. The same way we have included libraries for our tracer and ES6 module loader. The same way you can download them manually and you can include them, put them inside a lib folder in your project and you can refer it from there. Okay, or you can basically use your CDN as well. You can directly put the URL here. For example, here if you see there are two different versions. One is an uncompressed version, one is a minified version. So in our production deployment code, we use a minified versions. I'll talk a little bit about what minified version is. So in order to include jQuery, you can directly copy this script tag and put it in your head section of your document. So then your jQuery is available for your project to use. Okay, so we have multiple versions of jQuery 1, 2 and above. We basically use jQuery 1 if you have if you are working or addressing browsers IE 8 and below. So that's when we use jQuery 1. But if you are using IE 9 and above, you can use jQuery 2 and above. Okay, so your jQuery 2 and 3 may not work on your lower browsers. So the reason because it does not have those polyfills that are required for your jQuery to work. Because when you include your polyfill code, your jQuery library size will grow. Okay, so what they have done is, so they have said like, okay, we'll give jQuery 1 for lower browsers, and for IE 9 and above, we use jQuery 2. Okay, so they basically will have polyfills required for only your IE 9 and above. It will not have the lower browsers like IE 7, IE 6 and all of that stuff. Okay, so you can include your uncompressed version or your minified version. You also have slim version, so it's up to you whichever the one that you wanted to use. Okay, so let me go back to my code once. So let me go to my HTML file. So here is where I included my jQuery. If you see, so I have JS vendor jQuery 1.11 2.js. It's inside my JS folder. You open your JS folder. Here you'll see under vendor directory, you'll see those jQuery version 1.11 2. I mean, you can use jQuery 2 and 3. It's fine. I'm just using 1 here. Okay. Okay, let's go back to here to make sure that I already talked about this. And so let's talk a little bit about what is a minified version and what is a non-minified version. So the way you can go back to, you have some online tools that you can use. Online JavaScript minifier. Let me show you a little small code example on how a minified version looks like and how an uncompressed version looks like. So here I can just paste the code that I want to minify. For example, let's say I have a method called add. which basically takes two variable names ABC, ABC and BCD. Here I'm going with a little bit larger variable names because I wanted to show you how your minified version will address that. For example, here I have written ABC plus BCD. So this is a small function which takes two parameters and then gives a summation of those two parameters. This is your uncompressed version of your function. Okay, if I just say compress it will create a minified version for me. So this is your minified one. If you see it replaced that ABC with your N, replace that BCD with your D, and you have your N plus D. If you see trying to reduce the amount of the code, like it replaces your variable names to a shorter variable names. So that way if your uncompressed version is, let's say it's 1 megabyte, your compressed version might be in just few kilobytes. Okay, so the reason why we do that, if your browser has to download 1 megabyte file, it takes a little bit of time. If it's just few kilobytes, it can download faster. Okay, if your file size is small, that means your request can complete quickly and your application performs faster. So that's why we used a minified version. So here is a tool that you can use to play with the minified version, but we also have JavaScript build tools that we can use, like Gulp and Grunt and Webpack are some of the tools that we use to actually minify the code that we have written. Instead of using an online tool like that, as a part of your application build process, it takes whatever the code that you write and it will minify them and create production ready code. So those are some of the build tools that we use. Okay, so that's the difference between an uncompressed version and your minified version. So if you are performing any debugging, your minified version is pretty bad. You will not be able to debug or understand the code that you have written because your minified code looks a little different than your regular code. So when you are performing debugging, you basically use an uncompressed version. If you are using non-debugging or in your production environments, we don't do debugging. So that's when you basically go for your minified version to make your application perform faster. So you can even open this. For example, if you open an uncompressed version here, let's take this HTTPS URL. And let's paste that here. So this is your Jquery code, the library code. Okay, and then you can basically take the minified one. And you can put them in a side-by-side tab to see how a minified version looks like. If you see, if this page looks like, this is a readable code. We can read it, right? So it's much readable. But if you see your minified version you cannot even read it properly because it removed all those white spaces and stuff that we have, line breaks and everything. It puts everything inside one single line or one single statement. It also replaces your variable names. For example, here your minified version, your non-minified version has a global and factory variable names. If you see, your minified one has A and B, A comma B. Okay, so by looking at it, I would know, okay, this function takes a global, this function takes a factory as a parameter. But by looking at your minified one, you will not be able to understand what A and B is. But your browser, for your application to work, it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's the difference between your uncompressed version and your minified version. You have, when you are using Jquery for your local development, people go with your uncompressed one because as you are developing, you might run into some errors. You'll probably have to look at or debug the code. So that's when we basically go for uncompressed one. For production builds, we basically go with the minified one so that your application downloads things faster and your performance of your application is not impacted. Okay, so that's the difference between your minifier and the other ones. And okay, so the way you can enclose your Jquery or write your Jquery code, you basically write it inside so it would be something like this. You basically write Jquery off. Here this Jquery off actually takes a function. So inside this function, you can enclose all the code that you wanted to write with your Jquery. For example, here I write an anonymous function. So inside this function, we can basically write all the code that you wanted to write inside your Jquery. Okay, but here what happens is, instead of using your Jquery keyword every time that you wanted to perform a selection on an element, instead of using a Jquery, we basically use $. So $, is a shortcut for your Jquery word. Okay, instead of writing it like this, we basically say $. and then we write your function. So this function that we are trying to write is also called your ready function. Your ready function in your jQuery. So when you hear the term ready function in jQuery, so this is what they are talking about. Okay. So instead of using jQuery here, we can use dollar. Okay, whatever you wanted to write, you basically enclose that inside a function. So this function will execute the function that you are passing. We say we are calling the jQuery function by passing a function. So whatever you put inside this function will get executed by your jQuery library. Okay, this is actually called your ready function. Okay, so we have already seen that window.onload parameter. So window.onload takes another function, and then we can basically so there is a difference between your window.onload and your ready function in jQuery. So window.onload function is a JavaScript function. So we can actually pass a function to your window.onload. So what your window.onload does is it waits for your whole HTML parsing is done of your document. It waits for all your images are done. It waits for all your styles are rendered, and then it will execute the code inside that function. So whereas your document.ready function, it waits only until your HTML parsing is done. Once your HTML parsing is complete, it will run the code whatever is inside that function. It will not wait for your images or styles to be rendered on your browser. So this is one of the popular interview question people ask. Difference between your document.ready function in jQuery and your window.onload. Okay, understood the difference? Your window.onload waits until your whole HTML parsing is done, images are loaded, styles are rendered, and everything is ready. So whereas your document.ready, it waits only for your HTML parsing is done. It will not wait for your images are done, and all other scripts are downloaded and other stuff. Okay, so that's one of the popular question. Now let's talk a little bit about your jQuery selectors. They are not really jQuery selectors; they are actually CSS selectors. If you remember, in our CSS session, we talked about different CSS selectors like simple selector. We have class selector, ID selector, pseudo selector, pseudo classes. So let me show you that one more time. Here is your CSS session that I have taken, where when we're talking about selectors, I told you about your simple selector. You have your ID selector, class selector, we have your descendant selector, immediate child selector, attribute selector, star selector, and we have talked about pseudo classes. We basically use these selectors, your CSS selectors, to select your HTML elements on your browser. Okay. These are the same ones that we use with JavaScript. We say document.getElement by ID, document.getElement by tag name, document.getElement by class name. So those are all your CSS selectors itself. The same way your jQuery also relies on your CSS selectors to select your elements. Okay, so let me show you the application that we'll be working on. So here is the app that we'll be working on. So this is just an application that was built using jQuery and Bootstrap. So this is just a code example that I found on Pluralsight that will help us to perform some querying on the DOM. Okay, let's get started. So this page, the corresponding HTML of this page is inside this HTML tab. The CSS that is running that particular page is inside your CSS tab. The JavaScript that is running that particular page. These are some of the code snippets that we can use when you are playing with this particular application. Okay, so let me show you an advantage of your jQuery. So let's go to your content. So let's say in order to select a particular element on your DOM, we basically use an ID selector or a class selector, right? So let's say this HTML basically contains a h2 tag. So what is that? Oh, it's not here, but let's see. If we just hover on this guy right here, if you see that's a h2 tag. You see it says h2.expanded. Okay, this is our h2 tag. If you wanted to select this header2 tag on your page, so the way you can do that is you can directly say $, and then you open your single quotes, and then you put h2. Okay, and then you can assign that to a variable, variable my h2 or h2 equal to dollar of h2. Okay, and then you can see what is inside h2 by typing h2. If you see, your h2 basically is a jQuery element. Okay, so this is how you select an element. If you see what is the selector, it's a simple selector. We are selecting the element by name of the tag. Correct? So dollar is your jQuery function, and you open your parenthesis, and then you basically pass the element that you wanted to select. So h2 basically is a simple selector. If you want, you can pass an ID by. I'll show you how to do the other ones, but this is how to do a simple selector. So if you see, it's very simple. You don't have to write document.get element by ID. Rather, in jQuery we just say dollar and you can pass the element. Okay, let me show you another. So let's add a class to this particular h2. Now we have your h2 element. What I wanted to do is I wanted to add a class to this h2 element. So the way if you have to do that with your JavaScript, let's try that with JavaScript first, and then we'll do that with your jQuery. Okay, first we need to select your h2 element. So I'm going to write h2 equal to. So how we do that? We say document dot get element by tag name, and then you pass your h2. So that basically will give me all the elements which are h2 elements. So this is your plain JavaScript. Correct? That looks familiar, right? Document dot get elements by tag name of h2. So that will basically give me my h2 element. If I wanted to print out h2, I can just say h2. Okay, this h2 basically have a class called expanded. For example, let's hover on that and see that. If you see, it says h2 dot expanded right on the top. So it basically have a class called expanded. So now what I wanted to do is I wanted to add another class to that h2 element called highlighted. So the way you can do that, you can basically say h2, because it's an array, I have only one h2. I'm going to say h2 of 0 dot class name plus equal to, that is h2 dot class name equal to h2 dot class name plus, I wanted to add something called highlight, h-i-g-h-l-i-g-h-t, semicolon. If you see, that's highlighted now. Now it has two classes. One is your expanded, one is your highlight. Okay, so this is how we do it in your JavaScript. You get your element that you wanted to get, and then you can add a class name like this. Likewise, you can add your style properties, CSS properties, and whatnot. Okay, so if you have to, let's say, remove that class, so let's say now it has expanded and highlight. Now what I need to do is I need to say h2 of 0 dot class name dot split, and then I need to pass an empty space. Okay, of the first one is your expanded, the second one is your highlight. So you say 0, and then you can assign that to your h2 itself. h2 of 0 dot class name equal to. If you see, now it removed that highlighted class and then just added your expanded. So understood these things that I have done. I have a h2 element which contains your class name called expanded when I loaded the page. Then I programmatically added my highlight to that existing classes. Okay, now that got highlighted. Then programmatically I removed it, right, using my JavaScript. So there is nothing fancy there. It's very simple. Understood the code snippets that I have wrote here? So let me know if you haven't understood. So it's basically a string. I'm splitting my string using my dot split method, and I pass an empty space. So it basically gives me an array of two values. One is your expanded, the second one is your highlight, and I'm taking the first value because your array starts at index 0. Of 0 gives me the first value, which is my expanded. I'm setting my class name back to my expanded, and if you see after that, I see that it's just expanded and that highlighting went away. Okay, so that's how we do this inside your JavaScript. So let's take a look at how to do the same thing with your jQuery. You said variable h2 equal to dollar of h2. If you see, I got my h2 element, I can just print it out. Now if I wanted to add a class, I just say h2 dot add class. I wanted to add a class called highlight, highlight. If you see, I got my highlight. I have a function called add class that I can use. The same way, if I wanted to remove it, I can just say h2 dot remove class, highlight. Okay, it removed my highlighting. If you are wondering where we are getting that highlighting color from, so that we are getting it from our CSS. I have a highlight class which has a background color #ff9. So if you see, it's very easy to work with your jQuery. You just have to know what functions that you have to use. You have your add class and remove class. So what your jQuery does is, jQuery selects your HTML element, and then it extends your HTML element and adds all these functions on top of it, so that we can use those functions to do all your DOM manipulations. Okay, so it's very simple to perform a small operation like this using your jQuery. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the other things that I wanted to talk about. So here is basically another way. This is your simple selector. I wanted to select all the divs. You pass your simple selector, you get all the divs, and you wanted to find the length of it. You can call your length method to give your length of the number of divs that you have. Here is another one. Give me all the h2s. Okay, so here if you try to pass a selector, so if there is no element matching that selector, your no match, the element that you get back, something that you get back here, ideally you think it would be undefined, but it's not. Okay, it's not really undefined. It's like a variable. It basically gives you your jQuery element, which does not have any. Basically, it hasn't found any element with that selector. So it gives an element object which does not have anything. Okay, it does not give you your undefined or your null. Okay, here is another example where I wanted to get the text of my h2. Your $h2, your text function of your jQuery element will give you the text of your h2. For example, let's try that. Let's go back to our example page. $. I wanted to select my h2 and I wanted to find the text of it. If you see, it printed out 15509 main street. Okay, understood how your text function is working? You're basically asking, okay, for this element, give me the text inside. Okay, your text function is not only it acts as both your getter function as well as setter function. Say for example, if you wanted to set the text, you can actually do that. Okay, I wanted to change my text from 15509 Main Street to, let's say, 12 Main Street. If you see, your text actually changed from your 15509 Main Street to your 12 Main Street. Your text function is both your getter function as well as your setter function. Okay, understood your text function in jQuery? Alrighty, let's go back. That's your text function. You pass the string that you wanted to change. Alrighty, moving on. Here, these are some of your CSS selectors. So we have your button. That's your simple selector. You pass the name of your tag. This is your ID selector. So your ID uses a hash. Hash denotes an ID. The same way in CSS we have hash, right? When you are defining your CSS styles, it's the same thing. Hash, the name of your style. The ID, the name of your ID of your HTML element. Your dot, that's the name of your class. Select all the buttons with your .btn. Okay. So can anybody tell me what is this? List item. Okay. Explain me what it is. I understood that we are trying to select the first child of a li, but what is this whole CSS selector is trying to do? So what does it mean if there is a space here? It's a descendant selector. It's basically telling find an element which contains this ID, and inside that you will find Alice and give me the first shell. Okay, if you have your square bracket here, I mean your greater than symbol, that's an immediate child. If there is a space, that means it's a descendant selector. Your special features is actually a UL tag inside your HTML document. You have a UL which contains your special features, and then inside that you have multiple LIs. Give me the first shell. You can go back to the page and actually see. Go back here to your HTML. You go further down. Here is your UL with your ID special features. Inside that you have your LIs, and you wanted to select your first LI. Okay, so that's very simple there. And then here, so does anybody know what is this? Char equal to? So it's basically starts with find me all anchors which contains your href value, starts with http:// your caret icon here is your cap icon. It's your starts with. Give me all anchors which contains your href value, starts with your this / http://. Okay, so this is how you can actually create a HTML element as well. I wanted to create a div. I'm going to just pass the element that I wanted to create to my dollar function. Dollar, this is the element that I wanted to create. Okay, let me show you an example for that. Let's go back here. Now let's say I wanted to create a div. Variable, new div that I wanted to create, equal to dollar. Here I'm going to say I wanted to create a div with text hello jQuery. End of div. So my new div is created. Now I wanted to add this div to something. So the way you can do that, so let me find an element that I can add this div to. Where is my HTML? Let me switch tabs to find out the one. So here I have a div called house detail. So let me add that to my house detail div. Say dollar, select the element with ID. So how we do that? Hash house detail. I'm going to use a function called append of my new div that I created. New div. Okay, now if you see, you should see your hello jQuery here. See, it got appended. Okay, likewise we have append, we have prepend, we have .html. So we have jQuery functions that you can find out from your jQuery documentation. jQuery append. Here is your append function. Okay, this is your .append function. Let me find out the right, I think it's jQuery insert options, I guess. Insert. So you have your, if you see append, insert after, add, we have like multiple methods, insert before, insert after. So these are all the functions that they are available. Okay, you can do your DOM insertion. Here is your after, before, insert after. So here are some of them. You can also check if a div has an element has a class. You can use your has class method. HTML is the one. If you do .html, it will replace everything. For example, let's go back to our application. Let's say I wanted to say dollar slash hash house detail .html of new div. This is how you set your inner HTML. If you see everything is gone, I got my hello jQuery. If you see I replace the entire content of my div. to this new div that I created. Hello jQuery. Okay, let's refresh that. Let's go back to where we were. So understood your HTML literals, how to create elements and how to insert. Those are some of the elements, methods that you can use: append, prepend, insert after, insert before, all of those stuff. Okay, if you wanted to create multiple elements, you can just pass them as an array with comma separated. Here I wanted to create a span and I wanted to create a div. Okay, so here this is another way to perform your selection. You can pass your direct document.getElementById, by ID, your JavaScript one. So basically what it does is it will execute this, get the HTML element and then convert that to a jQuery element and then we'll set that variable. So this element will have those functions like the append, prepend, add class, remove class, all those functions will be there. Okay, this is how if you wanted to still use for your selection, if you still want to use your JavaScript selecting methods, you can still use that. Okay, so we also have find methods. We can use dollar, okay, find an element and inside that find me a button with your class contains, this is your star equal to means contains btn primary. It will basically give me all the buttons which basically contains your btn primary. Star equal to means contains. You have your dot find method that you can use. Okay, so here is another method that you can use called parents. Parents basically will give you all the parents. So let's run this and see what will happen. You can just copy this statement and go back to your content. Let's paste that here. Now I wanted to see all the parents. So these are all my parents. Okay, basically what it is trying to do is I basically have a table somewhere in this page. Let's see, here is my table. This table contains, I think let's go, I think if I show you the HTML, I think it will make more sense. Here is your table, tbody. Tbody has a table parent. The table basically have a div parent. This div has some other parent. So likewise it will go to your, it will give you all the parents of a particular element. Your parents method will give you all the parents. The same way you have a children method which will give you all the children. Okay, you can execute those methods. You have your parents and you have your children. Okay, if you know the exact parent, you can also do that. For example, I wanted to find the parent that is matching table. It will give you all the table elements that are immediate parents of your tbody. Generally you'll have only one. You basically get only one. Okay, because inside your table you write your table head and table body elements. Okay, you can use your children to get all the children of a particular selector. Okay, so this is your class. So if you wanted to change an attribute, like if you wanted to change a style attribute from, or if you wanted to add an attribute, you can actually do that. You say select the HTML h2 element and change the attribute. What is the attribute that I wanted to change? Is the style attribute, and the value that I wanted to have is a background color, so and so color. Use your attribute method to do it. Okay, or if you wanted to add a CSS property, you can also do that by using your .css method. So your .css method is again your getter and setter. You say .css, you pass your background color property. It will give you the current background color of your h2. Okay, and if you wanted to set it, you don't directly set it, but you just pass it as an object. Because you might wanted to set multiple properties, so you can do background color, the color that you wanted to set. If you say this is not really a true CSS property, because your background color is background hyphen color. But here when you are using your CSS function, you have to use your camel case. You remove your hyphen and then put the camel case. Or you can, if you want, you can directly use your CSS style as well. Okay, so you can try this as well when on that page, it will still work fine. And this is your add class and remove class functions that we have seen. So this add class and remove class functions, they can also take a function as well as a parameter. Say for example, if you wanted to conditionally add a class, conditionally remove a class, you can write that logic inside this function. Okay, you wanted to check some condition and then return a different class. Okay, you can write an if else condition. If this matches, then return this class, or else return this class. You can write those inside these functions and conditionally, set the styles that if you want by having a function here. It's an overloaded function. Basically it actually takes a string, or you can actually take a function. Okay, so we also have your toggling. Toggling is actually very simple. You can call your hide to hide an element. You can call your show function to show an element. For example, so all of these that is there in this tab, you can actually run it on that page, the example page that we have. So let's go to your console. Let's clear the stuff that here. Say $. I wanted to hide my h2. Most of the time you tend to forget your single quotes there. When you select your element, make sure that there are single quotes. So I run into this problem most of the time. Say $, single quotes h2, you selected, and then you say hide. I wanted to hide it. If you see, it goes away. I wanted to show it. Call your show method to show it back. You see, it comes back. The same way you can use your toggle. Toggle basically what it does is if it shows, it hides it. If it hides, it shows it. For example, I say h2 dot toggle. Currently it is showing, so it will basically hides it. When you call the toggle function one more time, it shows it. Okay, understood your show, hide, and toggle? Very simple. Let's go back. Add class, demo class, your toggle. So if you wanted to toggle based upon a condition, you can also have a function. And these are your fading effects that you have. You wanted to fade out, fade in, fade out fast. And if you wanted to add some parameters as well, like for example, your fade out, it basically gives a fade in, fade out effect on your page. And go back to your HTML. Let's remove this. Say $, h2 dot fade out. It's fade out. Obviously it's kind of like slowly goes away, and then you can use your fade in. Okay, it comes back slowly. You can control like how much speed that you want your, if you wanted to slowly fade away, slowly fade in, you can also do that. You have your fast and slow things that you can set. Fade out fast, fade in slow and stuff. Here is like fade out fast. If you wanted to once this fade in is complete, if you wanted to do something, you can enclose that inside this function. Okay, once the fade in of my h2 is complete, just add a class to my special features, to another element. You can do that inside your fade in function. You understood this one? Once a fade in is complete, you wanted to do something. Okay, you can enclose that. You can pass a function, and then you can do that here. Here what we are doing is, once a fade in is complete, I wanted to add a class called highlight. Okay, you can actually execute it. Let's copy this. Let's go back to your content, clear it is, and paste it. If you see, basically once a fade in is complete, it basically adds your style here. Okay, you can do that for your fade out as well. Dot fade out, it goes away, and once it goes away, then it executes whatever is inside the function. Okay, understood? That's your fade in, fade out effect that we can perform. Okay, events is another important one. Okay, one of the event is your document.ready event, so that we have already seen. So once a document is ready, it's like an event. Okay, the document is ready. So if you wanted to run something, you enclose that inside your ready function. Okay, the same way you have your click events and all those other events that you have, you can also do that. So here you can do dot on, and then you can pass your click. This is the event, and once this click is executed, this function will be executed. You're basically adding an event to an element. Okay, and I wanted to add an event to a button. This is the ID of the button on. This is the event that I wanted to add, and once this event happens, this is the function that will get executed. Okay, either you can, ideally I don't like this do dot on, so there is a better way to do it. Say dot click button, the ID of the button, dot click, and then you do your function. If you see, we can do the same thing with your add event listener as well. So this is a better way. It's like less code that you write. Okay, hash save button dot click, and the function that you want it to execute once a button is clicked. If you want, you can do on, you can do off as well. Off is basically it will remove that event. Okay, we can on and off. Okay, one basically means it will execute only once. Okay, you wanted to have this function, this click event bound only once. You can do that using your dot one as well. Okay, once this event is finished, so it's not going to work anymore. You wanted to do it only one time. Okay, this is your blur. If you wanted to, once this button is blurred, then if you wanted to execute something, then you can basically run it. So likewise, we have your hover, all these different events that we have. We can associate a function with those. Okay, understood your events? It's not that difficult. You can just refer to this document to whenever you are writing jQuery code to see how you can bind a click event. Okay, we can also perform chaining inside your jQuery. So for example, here if you see, I wanted to add a width property, set a width property, height property, and I wanted to add a class to a particular for my LIs inside my special features UL. Okay, you can do this in 3 different steps. So when you do it in 3 different steps, it's not really an efficient way because you have to select the element multiple times. Okay, what you can do is there are a couple of ways to do it. You can basically assign this selected element to a variable, and we can do dot width dot height dot add class, or we can directly chain it. Dot width, this is your selector. You say dot width dot height dot add class. You see, I chain my methods. Okay, it will basically set your width first, set your height first, and add your class. Here if you see, we also have your dot each. Dot is your jQuery for each. So for each of these element, that is for each of your li, I wanted to do something. So use your dot each function and then do it. Here what we are doing is we are selecting that each li element and getting the text of it, and then we are extracting the attribute of it using your dot attribute function. We have a data feature ID attribute on that each li, and then we are setting the text for it. For example, let's go back to that HTML and you will see that better. For each li, you have an attribute called data feature ID. It has a value 131, 137, 188, 221. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to extract this attribute value and I want to append here to my text. So it will become crown molding throughout 131, granite countertops 137, new carpet and tile 188, shutter blinds and all windows 221. Okay, so we are doing that inside your jQuery function. Let me know if you haven't understood that well. Here dot each. There it is. We are saying dot each. For each li element, I wanted to execute a function. This item would be your li and the index of the item. Okay, if you're, it's basically starts at 0. When you are working with your first li, your index would be 0. And what we are doing is we are selecting that item and then we are changing the text of it. The new text is going to be the existing text plus some space plus the item attribute, which is your data feature ID. We are getting the value of that particular item attribute, which is your data feature ID value. We can actually run it. Let's copy that. Let's go back to your content. Let's clear this guy. Okay, paste it. Okay, here if you see, each and everything has 131, 137, new carpet and tile 188, shutter blinds and windows 221. Okay, understood how it actually worked? We took each element and then we changed the content of it by getting the attribute ID value. Okay, this is one way to do it, or if you wanted to set that to a variable, you can also do that. It's up to you, and ideally I like it doing this way. because having that variable, I mean, does not make any sense at all. So the important thing is we can chain functions inside your jQuery. Okay, here is another way to chain it. So here is like, I have a button, I have a click function. Once a click function is completed, I wanted to add a class called border for that button. You see, I'm chaining two methods. One is your click and one is your add class. Okay, understood? Dot click and dot add class. Okay, and the last one is your user input. If you have an input box, right? So here I have a notes box. I wanted to set the value of it to Great House. Okay, your val function is another getter setter function. You generally use it for your text areas and your text boxes. Okay, so here I wanted to set it. I can pass the value that I wanted to set it. I wanted to get it. I directly pass your val of. That will give you the value of your text box, the current value of your text box. You understood your val function? It's another getter setter function. If you want to set an input value programmatically, you can do it. If you wanted to get it, you can also get it. Okay, your val function is a getter setter function. The same thing for your, if you have a calendar component or something, you can also do that. Val of, you can set your date value, and if you wanted to get it, you can get it as well. Okay, this is how you access your checkboxes or programmatically check it. So here I have a checkbox. I wanted to change the property of that element. The element property is checked. I wanted to set it to true. This is how you programmatically check a checkbox. Okay, you set your checked property on that element. You set it to true, your checkbox would be checked. You set it to false, your checkbox would be unchecked. Okay, this is how you do your radio buttons. Here we are selecting an element with an attribute called name set to available, and we are getting the checked value if it is whatever the value of checked is. If the radio button is checked, we are going to get true. If the radio button is not checked, we are going to get false. That's how you work with your radio buttons. So these are some of the examples here to get started with your jQuery. Okay, so if you see, we can do everything whatever we have done here with your JavaScript itself. We really don't need jQuery, but it's an easier way to do it. So with less code, you can achieve whatever that you wanted to do with your jQuery itself. Okay, jQuery has taken your element object and added other functions on top of it so that it makes our life easy. Okay, so that's your jQuery. All of this that is here, you can actually test it. Just take it and put it inside your console on your page, and you can observe the output. Okay, so this is one part of your jQuery. So for your jQuery, there is actually another part called jQuery UI. jQuery UI. Your jQuery UI is a library that basically contains set of widgets that we can use on your applications. For example, you wanted to have a calendar component, for example, or a date picker. Date picker is a good example. You see, you have a date picker component that you wanted to use. You can basically use a date picker component from your jQuery UI library. Okay, this jQuery UI component will work on all your browsers. Okay, so here if you wanted to add this component to your page, you can actually view the source of it or the example here. If you see, it's very simple. You create an input and assign an ID to it, and you call the date picker function. $date picker is your selector for this input component, and you call your date picker function on it. That will give you a date picker capability for that particular input. Okay, so in order to work with your jQuery UI, we need to include your jQuery UI library. That's your CDN, your content delivery network hosted library. That means you don't have to manually download it. It's already hosted on a server. So you can just include this inside your HTML page, and then your jQuery UI components are available for you. Okay, so the popular ones are here. So you can, if you want a slider component, see, these are some of these components you might have seen on different websites. Slider components. If you want to open your dialog boxes, say this is a dialog. Some of these animation, it also has some functionalities, like if you see, so there's a very cool animated dialog, and you also have tabs. Tabs is one popular component that we use. So these are your tab component. So these are not all your standard HTML components. Your standard HTML does not have these. Okay, your date picker is there in your HTML5, but that's a new one anyways. So before HTML5 date picker, we used to use your Jquery date picker. Okay, that is available. We also have spinner components. Progress bars is one other popular component. Now it's there in your HTML5 as well. Date picker, your progress bar. If you wanted to use your progress bar component on your page, you just view the source of it. If you see, you just have to call the progress bar function to use your progress bar. If you see, it is bound to your div with ID progress bar. Okay, if you wanted to show progress bars, you can use it. So not only these are your standard jQuery UI components, it also has like dragging and dropping features as well. So if you see, you can drag and drop features, selectable, sortable. So we can select, if you wanted a component like this, you can use it. Sortable. You see, I'm able to drag and drop pages, components. So you use whichever the component that you want on your web application, use that. You have menu component. Menu is one other popular component that we use. Here is your menu component. Okay, so these are some of the components that we use. We also have various other components which are third-party components. For example, you wanted to have a table which is sortable, searchable, which contains your pagination, all of that stuff. We also have components for it. So there are two popular components, that grid components that we use. One is your data table component, and the other one is your open source one, which is your JQ grid. We also have slick grid and other different jQuery components that we basically, if you wanted a grid which contains these features, you can just browse through. Okay, what are jQuery plugins? They are also called as plugins. Okay, so that plugin page will contain the API on how to use that plugin inside your application. So likewise, we have various third-party components which are licensed under MIT, so that those are open source. We can use them as well. So that's one other thing. We also have jQuery themes. For the components that you are using, we can have themes as well. For example, this is one theme. So likewise, we have various. This is your default theme basically. If you see all these gray backgrounds and stuff, these are your default themes. So here is another theme that you have. Likewise, you can use your various themes as well. And you also have your API documentation to see different things that are available for those components. Okay, so this is your jQuery, and I think that's pretty much it. I think this is a very good introduction for you. I think this should be good enough. I think the important things that you have to know about your jQuery, it's a DOM manipulation library. jQuery uses your CSS3 selectors to select your elements, and we have different methods. It basically wraps up your JavaScript element and provides us with various methods like add class, remove class, your .css, .style, all of those methods like .click, .hover, all of these functions that are available. We can bind events to your HTML elements using your jQuery. And jQuery also provides us with your jQuery UI portion of it, which contains a set of components that we can use on your web applications. And jQuery also, using jQuery, we can create plugins, or we can use existing plugins already available. For us, if you want like a grid plugin or a menu plugin, that is something that is available online for free, you can actually use them. Okay, so that's pretty much on your jQuery. And I think with whatever that we talked about with your jQuery and JavaScript, you should be able to finish all the case studies in the book. All the form validations and other stuff is there in that book. You can basically work with it. Okay, just work on those and finish those as well. And from our tomorrow session, we'll talk about Angular. Okay, I'll be going directly to Angular 2. I'm not going to touch Angular 1. Because Angular 1, I think it will become obsolete at some point, I guess. So now all the new application developments, they are performing with Angular 2 and above. Okay, then we'll take a look at your Angular 2 development starting tomorrow. Okay? Alrighty.